to this building, transferred the payload into it, and this building rolled up to the orbiter on the pad with its payload bay doors open and installed the payload into it. So again, you're moving around these things. The payload is about 35,000 pounds, and it's about maximum 15 feet wide by 60 feet long. We're talking big things, you know, just really, you have to move around these big things and not break anything. So that's the challenge. And so that's got the major components here. This is a liquid oxygen. They could get about 3 launches out. If this thing is full of liquid oxygen, that one's full of liquid hydrogen, you get about 3 launches out of this. So enough fuel in there.
And Marty, can you clarify the time frame that activity was going on? Because that's kind of important too.
With the
fixtures on the pad.
On the pad.
Yeah.
So that was about when we should have been launching, so it was like October of '85 when we had the Enterprise there. We're about a year, we got about a year behind. And then, you know, not too much long after the Challenger blew. So anyway, now the Enterprise, you might remember, was the same vehicle they did the approach and landing test program. Before the shuttle ever flew in space, it was dropped off the 747. They wanted to see how it flies and lands. It wasn't built for going into space. There were no active engines on it. In the back, it was just dropped and then flew down like a glider. So this is that vehicle that we got for our fit testing. So here you can see, here's the Enterprise on this big sling, and here it is being stacked up on the external tank. And here's another view of it. I have a lot better pictures of that. So everything with Enterprise went great. Whoops, I didn't advance it. So now we're kind of building up to what's going to go on. So everything we did, the whole verification test, it fit everywhere, it did everything. Everything was wonderful. Everything is looking great until this happened not too much after that. And you all probably remember that. And that changed a lot of people's lives. And it was a first time, aside for the Apollo 1 fire, that America had a visible failure in front of everybody. And it was a big time of change. So anyway, I refer to this as the perfect storm. And basically, there's a couple things, and I'll try to talk slow enough, but yet fast enough. That was the flight with the first teacher in space. So there was a lot, you can imagine, in addition to political pressure, there was a lot of like, hey, this is a great thing. Not really political, but people were anxious for this because it had been a long time in the making. In Florida, they have 2 pads, pad 39A and 39B. All of the moon launches all launched from pad A. Skylab launched from A, but the crew launched from pad B. That was the last time pad B had ever been used, was for Skylab crews. But with the shuttle program, they had only had an orbiter shuttle on pad A. For the first time in the shuttle program, and since Skylab, the Challenger was sitting on pad B. So it was a whole new thing, and it was on pad B because pad A was occupied with the Columbia, which was supposed to launch. So they're really kind of getting, you just picture, it's like a meat grinder. It's like you had a fixed amount of people that work with this thing, and it's hard enough. I saw at Vandenberg, we hadn't even launched anything, and I was working like double shifts. You wouldn't know when to eat, go to the bathroom, take a shower. It's like, and we weren't even launching anything yet. I can't imagine what the crews in Florida were going through that had first one real vehicle, they had the pressure to get launched safely, but then a second one on the pad. Huge, it's unbelievable. Those people were, you get the idea. They were pushed to the pushed limits. I can't even imagine what their personal lives must have been. Give you an idea, Air Force is real big on family. Divorce rate in the shuttle program, people I work with, is about 60% or so of the officers. So it really it was hard on the families. People were working many, many hours. And I thought you had a comment. Do you have any comment on any of that?
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, we were pushed. We were working at flight crew systems. We got Challenger was a bit behind. Then it's the same people working, trying to get 2 missions ready. And then they started running a system, I called it the perfect storm, because the Challenger could have launched like 2 days before. The weather was fine in Florida, it was warm enough, but the transatlantic abort site had weather problems. So in case you have generally like 2 engines go out on launch, you have to come down, you land at the transatlantic abort site in Spain, and you need to be able to land there. So they want to have that contingency. The weather was bad there. They scrubbed the launch that day, a perfectly wonderful day in Florida. I was there for a launch once, and it's a perfect day. Scrubbed it because the transatlantic site was down. So, and then the day before, they couldn't get the hatch closed on the Challenger. They had some odd thing, I don't understand. Answer's probably out there somewhere, but they couldn't lock and seal the hatch. So they had to abort that day. So anyway, the next day was President Reagan's State of the Union address on January 28th. So you can kind of picture all these things, political force, technical force, exhaustive workforce, all this stuff. And in Reagan's speech that night, so I got some quotes out of here, basically he was talking about how, and today we have a teacher in space. So, see, this was out of his original speech. Tonight while I'm speaking to you, a young secondary school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire is taking all of us on the ultimate field trip as she orbits the Earth. Yeah, it's wonderful, nothing wrong with that. But you can picture the political force that's generated down on NASA after Challenger slipping all these times, and the crew and the excitement for this. And even though the weather was a little cold, they didn't see that. And they knew, Thiokol, who designed the boosters, knew that there was going to be an issue, and you probably all heard about that. So, but NASA decided, no, we're going ahead. So they didn't want to, I'm not blaming Reagan, whatever. It's like, it was the perfect storm. It's like each little compartment of the way things were just hooked up the wrong way for everything. And then a little bit of history on politics. I found this out from my friend Julian Nod. By the way, he's a balloonist. He lives in Santa Barbara. He holds a bunch of world ballooning records and 96 British records. It's been 55,000 feet in a hot air balloon. So he's really into aeronautics and all, so he knew this little tidbit that I didn't know. Now, you all probably kind of remember Apollo 12, the second moon landing, launched into a thunderstorm, was hit by lightning. Very smart Alan Bean and the crew figured out what was what. They got it going again, even though they lost all their power, the cabin went dark. And just imagine that. So, but anyway, Nixon was attending the launch, and it's the first time American president had been at one of these launches. So, and that's why he believes, and I believe him, he kind of, again, he wasn't part of that decision process, but he feels the political pressure from Nixon being there to see this launch was very important. That's why NASA said, go ahead and launch it. So I believe the roots of all this go back to 1969 with Apollo 12 launching into a very bad, it was a bad day, weather day. It wasn't cold, but thunderstorm, big thunderstorm. Okay, so here I talked about these things. Columbia was undergoing launch processing on 39A, having its own delay issues. They all have delay, not that anything's bad, it's a very complicated vehicle. And then the workforce between 39A and B, and like I mentioned, 51L is the designation for Challenger, that was its launch. We went into this numbering system, by the way, because we're gonna have an East Coast and a West Coast launch. And the numbering was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of could get messed up between the sites. So they came up with this scheme. This was the year. This was, 1 was the Cape and 2 was Vandenberg. So if this launched from Vandenberg, it would be 5-2L. And then the letter was how many in the sequence if you launched that year. So this was like 1985, and you're not gonna have 26 launches in a year, so the alphabet was fine. So whatever number the letter L corresponded to was that one. So, but anyways, the first launch from that pad. So, and they launched slipped about 5 times, as I kind of talked about this, and the State of the Union address. So here we're getting into the first thing about the politics and what led up to this. It wasn't the O-rings that failed, and I get into that. The O-rings did fail, but they shouldn't have. Okay, so this is totally my conjecture, but it's evident to me that the commander of that flight, Dick Scobie, was not given the final vote. And we have a pilot sitting in the front row, Keith Gordon, friend of mine, and he regularly flies a small jet. And who has the ultimate authority of that airplane?
Pilot in command is the ultimate authority.
Okay, and you got all the weather, you got all the whatever, you make the decision if you want to take off in that thing. So in this situation, the conversations were going on between Johnson Space Center management, NASA headquarters management, and Thiokol. They were making the decisions. They had the information. They knew about the boosters. The poor crew and the commander, they're busy just training for their mission. But I really believe he should have been part of this conversation, because it wasn't like some background kind of thing. It's like, this was the #1 item that they were talking about. It's like, is this thing gonna be able to launch okay? The engineers that designed and built it and NASA bought off on it said, hell no. NASA said, we're launching. So anyway, but the NASA guy, the commander of the flight, he didn't have a vote in that, I'm sure of it. Because Thiokol was saying you probably have about a 30% chance of it being kind of okay, and just kind of dodging a bullet. If you were given a 30% chance of a successful takeoff, would you do it?
No.
Okay. Even if you were given a 90% chance of a successful takeoff, would you do it?
Maybe a little higher.
Okay.
Maybe a little higher odds.
This was very low. So anyway, so he didn't have a vote in that. He couldn't have had a vote in that. No pilot would go along with that. So he was not given the final authority. So the tragedy is like blaming your tires if you're driving in a blizzard and the signs are flashing, put on chains, no cars allowed beyond this point. No, I'll be okay without chains. That's basically what that launch was about. They totally exceeded what they knew was correct to do. So anyway, so I didn't want to get too much, I wanted to give you enough of a background what I believe the decision process was in addition to the O-rings. But so back at the ranch at Vandenberg, everything was like, okay, yeah, this happened, we're gonna keep going. But anyway, we started hearing this phrase caretaker status coming up. Probably about a month or two later or something. And I was like, well, what's that mean? So it's kind of like all these facilities, $2 billion worth of buildings, what are we gonna do with them? You know, because NASA hadn't decided or publicly said if they're gonna use Vandenberg. And, but then the word caretaker, the phrase caretaker status started, you know, more and more. Oh, caretaker status, oh, we're doing this for caretaker status? Oh, okay, yeah, okay, that's for caretaker status. It kind of became part of the daily conversations. And so anyway, I went into caretaker mode. But we're also, Johnson Space Center was trying to, and I got some papers here, they were trying to figure out, okay, we launched this thing, what if there's kind of another disaster? We got to figure a way to get the crew out of there. So being in flight crew systems, we got involved with the crew bailout scheme, they called it. So, but anyway, it's kind of, well, anyway. Okay, so other important factors of Vandenberg. You have the solid rocket boosters where you have the burn through and the O-ring and all that. Bottom line, it was launched in a lot lower temperatures than it should have been. I got pictures I'll show you where it's stenciled right on the booster. Store between 32 degrees and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That night the temperature got as low as 8 degrees. And these are like huge, big things sitting there, probably about 12 hours. And the cold, dark night there, and temperature got down to 8. I would guess that the cold soaked temperature of those boosters around launch time, maybe around 20 degrees, plus or minus, I don't know. But it was still cold out that morning, even though the sun was up. But sitting at 8 degrees probably for 7-8 hours overnight really chilled them down. So at Vandenberg, we have the same design with our boosters, same kind of O-rings, everything, except they made them out of composite materials. And light was called the filament wound case, so kind of like this carbon filament, whatever. It was a lot lighter than the steel cases they use in Florida. And back to our orbital geometry, when you launch equatorial, we don't think about this, but the Earth actually helps lift the vehicle up. And because of that, you can lift about 65,000 pounds in orbit from Florida, but from Vandenberg, that same everything, With the lightweight boosters, you can only lift a maximum of 35,000 pounds. With the heavier boosters, steel boosters, case boosters, you're probably looking at around, we were guessing like 25,000 pounds. So we got about 10,000 extra pounds of lift from having these lightweight boosters for Vandenberg. But after Challenger, they redesigned all that stuff. Oh, we're not using that bad design anymore, even though that it would have been fine if they launched within their temperature specs. Said, no, we can't use those. So those boosters all got scrapped, and we were left without boosters, basically, to put on the space shuttle from Vandenberg. And so that was like a big nail in the coffin. There were some acoustic concerns that they actually found some design around kind of thing. So that was looking good. Big one, and I have some pictures later of Discovery's first launch. That was going to be our orbiter, so we spent a lot of time with it. On its first launch, they lit the main engines, and then the main engine shut down. They detected some problems, so the solid boosters never lit. But what happened was all this hydrogen, you know, the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen that powers the shuttle, you have a lot of residue liquid hydrogen, and liquid hydrogens of a nature, just like say some liquid hydrogen turned into gas, is going up and hit this ledge here, just that friction of the molecules on here could start a fire. And that's what happened when they shut down on the pad and didn't launch the Discovery the first time. They had all these fires breaking out around the vehicle, and that really freaked them out. And they were trying to spraying water on it where they could, whatever. So then we looked at Vandenberg. It's like, wow, that was a big, wide open flame trench. It just basically sits on a mobile launch platform in Florida. But at Vandenberg, it sits basically kind of over like a toilet seat kind of square. It's like it was totally enclosed underneath. And if all that hydrogen pushed down in there, they figure, wow, we could have lots of fires and explosions underneath and blow up the whole pad. So the shutdown on the pad, 41D, so this was something I'm saying is Vandenberg was trying to figure out how do we deal with this, because that was before Challenger. It's like, wow, this is a big thing. They were talking about bringing in huge fans to blow out the hydrogen, or maybe opening up that flame trench somehow, but there's all kind of cables and stuff. And then, just a few months later, this was real, I saw this. Did you see the Titan blow up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Titan 34D, kind of which they were phasing out because the whole big thing was they wanted to use the shuttle, again, back to politics, it was sold to Congress that it's going to replace all these big, expensive, heavy boosters. So they're going to phase out Titan, they're going to phase out Atlas, everything's going on the shuttle. So, but still, they were still launching some because the shuttle program was new. So this Titan 34D with a big, huge 35,000 pounds by satellite on it, basically went to launch and it exploded right above the pad. And not only above the pad, but the launch control center is down here. There was like, something like 50 or something, about 50 people in the launch control center, about as many people in this room. And all this, and actually, even though they had big, thick, 5-foot walls, it broke through, and nobody got killed, but it was a pretty bad situation. They didn't know. This is a lot. Florida, they launched it into a thunderstorm kind of thing. They had very heavy wind shear, more and more wind shear. They exceeded their limits, and the wind shear tore up the rocket on ascent. So there were 3 US major failures, and that took out an Atlas. So here he took out a Titan, and he took out an Atlas, and before he took out the shuttle. So entire space program was shut down. We had no way to launch anything. And the Russians weren't our friends yet. So anyway, so I kind of covered all that. Did you want to say anything about any of this?
Well, you kind of touched on it, just to put stomp it a little bit more. This kind of changed the Air Force and NASA thinking about where the launch control center should actually be at the launch site. And we, as Marty mentioned earlier, at Slick 6, the launch control centers were right adjoining to the pad, which made it a perfect opportunity in case there was a pad failure that the LCC could be taken out as well. So this started a whole rebuilding, if you will, of launch control centers that were remote enough to be much safer. Because the watchword here for, all through this time frame, everything NASA talked about, everything Air Force talked about was safety.
especially if it was a safety after all this. So, yeah, it was a bad time. And it's kind of funny, recently there were 3 commercial launch failures. It was first a orbital from Wallops.
SpaceX.
And then SpaceX, and then there was one other. Someone else had, there were 3 commercial ones. So it's kind of funny, these accidents, what we've seen happen in 3. But anyways, my favorite slide. So the shuttle, it never began from Vandenberg. So on the Central Coast, there's the Chumash Indians. I don't know if you've all heard of that tribe. So they've been there like 15,000 years. And they had a lot of burial sites there. Anytime you go to move any dirt at Vandenberg, the archaeologist has to come in there. And he's like, is it okay to dig here? Well, let me study this for a month, whatever. A lot of times they just bring in a bunch of dirt and pile it over existing dirt so they didn't have to disturb the ground. So anyway, after the mole program being canceled and the shuttle having its issues and being canceled, so the Chumash Indian curse started becoming a common kind of thing. And that the gods weren't happy with this whole thing, and this is what was behind it. It was kind of serious. It sounds funny, but it was kind of serious. But anyway, a little known fact, our friend George Stetz, who actually were in contact, Bernie got us in contact yesterday, he's retired now. When he retired from the Air Force, he was one of the main managers there along with Bernie. When he retired from the Air Force, he launched a bottle rocket from Slick 6. And in my mind, and everyone else agrees with me, that was the first successful, 100% successful launch from Slick 6. That bottle rocket did what it was supposed to do. It could have fizzled, it could have blown up, whatever. It went. And I remember, as at his retirement, went whoosh, went way up, and the way bottle rockets do. First successful launch from Slick 6 was a bottle rocket, Colonel George Stetz's retirement. And true story, right?
Yes.
No objections there. Okay, they took over, Delta IV took over, and they've had 100% success rate of the Delta IV, of the one we were talking about launched yesterday, that Bernie slept through, and his hearing is still as good as it used to be, but he slept through it. And then it stands through today. This program with the Allison Delta United Launch Alliance, 100% success so far, and I forget how many launches they've had, but they've had a lot, and it's very robust. They've really built their reputation on reliability. So anyway, that's what it looks like. And then, okay, so back to the shuttle days. Air Force had all these payloads that were built to fit in the space shuttle. It's like, well, we're not going to put them on Titan anymore. We're not going to put them on Atlas. All the attach points, everything, their design, center of gravity, all this stuff, were all for the shuttle. So then they had all these payloads that could, all these spy satellites, whatever, they couldn't launch. And they weren't launching anything from Florida either. Matter of fact, Florida ended up taking, because we couldn't launch those, they started modifying them as best as possible, launching them on East Coast missions as high an inclination orbit as possible, so they could kind of overfly Russia, up in the 50-degree latitude range. So, so the Titan IV program was born. So you can see where the payload goes up in there, and it took over all the shuttle heavy payloads. But this took a while to get this program off the ground. It's like, oh geez, we got to do this. But at the same time, the payloads all had to be converted over so they would fit in this thing and ride correctly and all that stuff. So it was a huge turmoil time. And I actually, the guy, George Stetz, who retired and shot his bottle rocket, he ended up going to safety. He was head of safety at Vandenberg, and he hired me in to work safety for Titan IV at Vandenberg. So I got to work all the, not the payload, but the whole rocket's safety. And there's like so many, you think there's high voltages, there's high pressures, there's fuels that if you breathe it, they'll burn your lungs out. It's like everything hazardous in the world is in one place in a controlled environment to launch. So that was a really good program. And then Titan IVs ended up flying from that pad where the explosion was with the Titan 34D. But before, they had like 2 or 3 34D missions. They had vehicles left. They said, no, we're going to refurbish the pad after this big explosion. and they launched those payloads, and then they tore it down. They used it for like 2 or 3 launches. They tore the whole pad down and built it up for Titan IV. So, I always kind of maybe chuckle a little bit, but you know, there's requirements behind the scenes, so people knew more than me. Anyway, Air Force Space Command had come into Vandenberg, and really good thing happened. Retired astronauts started taking command of Air Force Space Command. And Kevin Chilton was the first one, he was a mechanical engineer. So they really started bringing a lot of astronaut know-how, people who've been in space, to head up Space Command. And Susan Helms, Lieutenant General, she flew on the shuttle a number of times on the space station, great person. She became head of Vandenberg, and for the 14th Air Force and other sub-organizations in 14th Air Force, and it was just terrific to have such an experienced astronaut there, and she was a lieutenant general. And so up to today, 30 years later, you know, shuttles in the background, we're still around, and you know, we like to talk about this, but those were really amazing days then until Challenger and you know, the challenges that we had, and then Challenger was like the bottom line challenge, is appropriate name, I guess. And so what they were doing the same way, they repurposed the manned orbiting lab facilities for shuttle, then, you know, whatever, the tons of infrastructure we put in for shuttle, now we're trying to repurpose them for other programs and get other programs. It was a very slow time. They weren't bringing many new programs into Vandenberg. So it's like, well, what are we going to do? But in the meantime, my favorite thing, Lompoc was kind of a one-horse town. It still kind of is, but there were like 2 motels there. But when the shuttle program was coming, they built an Embassy Suites, not a very big one, but you know, a number of probably about 4 major hotel chains. So now we have adequate hotels, and strangely enough, they get filled up a lot. People come up to the Central Coast. Anyone here see that movie Sideways? Remember that movie? Lompoc, Vandenberg, it's wine country now. Everyone likes to come up for wine tasting. So those hotels are getting used for wine tasting. So, but it's the economy there, and it's great. So anyway, and then SpaceX, SpaceX is launching from there. And we were just supposed to have a launch to Mars from Vandenberg. This would have been the first interplanetary launch, but there was a problem with the instrumentation on the rover, on the lander, and they had to delay it. Normally a launch would just get delayed a few months to fix it, but you need Mars close to the Earth, or else it'll take you 5 years to get there. You can't have it on the other side of the sun. So its next closest approach to Earth is going to happen in about 2 years. So we'll launch that again. We're looking to do a teacher conference and bring people out from Las Vegas for that. So we've got more time to plan for it now. Bottom line, I didn't really realize this. I thought the Russians had put people in polar orbit, but Denny corrected me on that. It's like typically like from Baikonur, they'll launch pretty much for them to meet us with the space station. They decide on 51.6 degrees. They haven't gone into polar orbit the same way we haven't. So, but here's a nice diagram of pretty much how the space station's orbit is. And you can see you overfly a lot of the Earth, but you're not overflying a lot of the Earth. So, so these numbers like 50 degrees, 51.6, that's the latitude. You know, which pretty much is probably above Maine in the United States, whatever, but it's not, you know, up to Alaska.
Yeah, and the importance of that, Marty, again, is a couple of things. First of all, there's a lot of theories about putting manned missions into polar orbit because of increased radiation exposure. You know how they're worried about radiation exposure even right now with the International Space Station. It would be even worse if you were to be launched in a polar orbit configuration. The other thing is electrostatic discharge. And they again, a lot of this is theoretical. They have no proof because they have nobody's launched it to see if what they think is going to happen actually happens, or if there's something else hidden out there that could be a problem.
And there's the Van Allen belts that protect the astronauts now when they're in space, but to go in polar orbit, you're flying outside the influence of them for some period of time. But again, you know, the flight surgeons, they looked at the stuff, they figured, yeah, it might be bad, but it's not like unstoppable. They felt that, and again, you know, a lot of times in the military, you do things that, you know, hazardous duty pay page or whatever. But, you know, those crews accepted that, whatever. Maybe they had all their kids already, so, you know, it wasn't a big deal. But, you know, it was acceptable levels, even though it was going to be higher radiation, it was acceptable to them. So,
Marty, 5 to 8.
what's that?
5 to 8.
5 to 8, okay, good. Let's get through these pictures real quick.
The SRBs, and he was the only person that did not sign the go for launch paperwork on that day, that infamous day back in 1986. His name is Alan J. McDonald, and turns out that he was absolutely right for what he was trying to stand for, but unfortunately Morton Dykall outvoted him, and even though his signature did not appear on the document, the launch document, he was pretty much banned from Morton Dykall. He lost his job, and as it turns out, there was a silver lining to this whole thing because he stood his ground, and then all this came out in the Presidential Commission that investigated the disaster. He was, by Congress, congressional decree, voted to return to his job. He's the only person that's ever happened to in the history of the United States. So he did get his job back, and not only did he get his job, he remained with Morton Dykall for many years after, and he was actually put in charge of, because of his knowledge and expertise, redesigning the SRB segment to make it much safer. So, but he did write a book, I failed to mention. It's called Truth, Lies, and O-Rings. It came out, I guess it was published in 2009, because he was kind of one of these guys that would, I hate to call him a geek, but you know, how you take notes and documentation of everything that transpired in those bad times. And he kept all the paperwork in a cardboard box, put it up in his attic. 20 years later, he was up cleaning out the attic. You know, holy crap, this would make a good book. Exactly right, and that's what he did. So it's out there if anybody wants some additional information and to see it from his perspective. Because I've got to read it. I just found out about it a couple of days ago, so I am in line to get Amazon.com a call. Marty?
Internet. Okay, we got some pictures, like 10, 15 minutes. I'll go through them real quick. Here's just kind of some cool pictures I took. This was mission number 6 that had just come back, so early on in the program. This is at Edwards Air Force Base. They didn't start landing them in Florida for probably about 25 or 30 missions later. They're landing